Hello, everyone. My name is Elana Olson, and I will be giving a presentation today on helping developers migrate their AngularJS app to Angular. So a little bit about me. For the last 3 months, I've been working on the Google Developer Relations team on Angular to help developers like you improve their experience with migrating from AngularJS to Angular. So what does developer relations actually do? Developer relations is all about learning from the community about how your experiences are with using the Angular platform. It then translates into building tools and new projects that we can help with the community. And then, like today, we are sharing it with you guys. So a little bit about me. I currently study software engineering at San Jose State University, and I love learning about computer science. I also love going on adventures and finding new gems in old places. So let's clarify some terminology before I continue using it. When I refer to Angular, I mean the versions 2+ of Angular, Angular of today and tomorrow. When I refer to AngularJS, I'm talking about all versions 1.x of Angular. So let's jump in and talk about what migrating actually involves. Migrating involves 3 things. First, investigating different migration paths. There's a whole universe of migration paths out there today, and sometimes it can be hard to understand which migration approach is right for you. The second is learning this awesome new framework called Angular. We all want to start using it, we all love it, and so it's an opportunity to begin a new learning experience. And the third thing is a trial and error process. You take different approaches and you apply them to your application and you see how it goes. Some approaches are good for other applications and some work best for yours. Like I said, there's a whole universe of migration approaches available today. It really can be difficult to understand which migration approach is appropriate for your path because of how customizable AngularJS was to begin with. There wasn't one standard of building an AngularJS app, and so there isn't one standard of migrating an AngularJS app to Angular. So I want to introduce to you, and we've actually already released it, an application that will help you determine which migration approach is right for your AngularJS app. It's called ngMigration Assistant. ngMigration Assistant is a command line tool that analyzes your AngularJS application. It provides you the criteria that it's analyzing for. It also gives you statistics on your application. And then in the result, it gives you a recommendation as well as files that you could modify in order to better prepare for migrating to AngularJS. Now, I'm going to give you a demo, but first I want to introduce the example application that we'll be using. This example application is on the AngularJS documentation. It's just the traditional PhoneCat tutorial application that most of us have already built. So let's take a look at how we actually use this ngMigration Assistant. So if you go into the directory of which your AngularJS app is, in this case, it's the Angular PhoneCat, all you have to type in is ngma, which stands for ngMigration Assistant, and run it. You'll find that you get a list of the criteria right here that it's looking for. It also identifies a link which you can learn more about why we chose the certain criteria. It then gives you app statistics, like how the complexity is comprised of your application, how many source lines of code are in your application, the file count, the relevant file count, and the AngularJS patterns that are found within your application. Then it gives you a list of files that contain AngularJS patterns that need to be modified. Let's zoom out a little bit so you can see this a little easier. So here we have one file, and it's the animations.js file. In it, we found JavaScript. So the big change between AngularJS and Angular is that Angular is now on Typescript. So one way that we can convert and prepare our app for migration is to convert this file from JavaScript to TypeScript. So let's look a little bit at why we chose certain criteria. So the first criteria that we have is complexity. Complexity is comprised of your files, how many files you have, the types of files you have, and the content within those files. So that goes to say that when we are counting how many files you have, we're actually ignoring all the files that are in your git ignore and certain default folders like node modules. There's no reason to scan for those. We also ignore, when we're counting for relevant files, we ignore files that are not JavaScript, TypeScript, or HTML, because that's where your AngularJS code is stored. Finally, the content within the files will be looking for whether you have controllers, you have AngularJS components, or you're using Angular components within it as your architecture. Next, we look at app size. In app size, we're looking at your source lines of code, how many files, and how many lines of code are in those relevant files. We also look at AngularJS patterns. Now, this would be patterns like JavaScript, root scope, compile, these kinds of things that have to be manually changed in order to prepare for migrating to Angular. And finally, we have a preparation necessary for migration step. This really compiles everything down about what we've scanned for, and then helps determine the feasibility of certain migration approaches. So how did I come about all of this criteria? Well, I didn't just willy-nilly choose some. I called you people up. I wanted to figure out from the community what the best criteria would be, what they struggle with most, what they don't struggle with. I also looked at the Angular documentation to see what the official terms are for what can't be converted to Angular and what can be. Let's jump a little bit more into the criteria. So with complexity, I talked about how many files you have, the types of files, and the content of the files. When we find a controller within your file, we recommend that you convert it to an AngularJS component, also known as a component directive. This is because the AngularJS component or component directive bridges the gap between an AngularJS directive and an Angular component. It provides a smoother transition to kind of hurdle that architectural change. In app size, we're looking at your source lines of code, again, ignoring files that are in your git ignore, node modules. And so we specifically count how many actual lines of code are in your application, ignoring blank lines and comments as well. This helps us determine the feasibility of certain migration approaches. If you have a 200,000 line code base, rewriting from scratch really isn't that feasible. Next, we look at AngularJS patterns. As I mentioned, we're looking for root scope and compile. These two both require manual changes in order to prepare for migrating to Angular. We also look for JavaScript, controllers, and we make sure that your app has unit tests. If it doesn't, then we simply recommend that you start using unit tests and provide documentation on how to get that step forward. And finally, the preparation needed. This is where everything comes down. We've trickled all the information and all the data that we've used and put it into our decision tree. And out comes a list of preparation steps that you can take in order to prepare your app to migrate from AngularJS to Angular. Next, we provide app statistics. In this case, it's best if the user knows why they're receiving certain recommendations. We don't want to just look at it and poof, give you a recommendation. Most people won't believe that. So in this case, this application had 2 controllers, 1 AngularJS component, 6 JavaScript files, and 0 TypeScript files. Had about 18,000 lines of code, 20 total files, and 11 relevant files. All of this helped us determine the migration path ready for this application. Another reason why we provide app statistics is because information is power. People love finding out more about their application, how it's organized, how it's constructed from a big picture view. Sometimes you don't get that opportunity to step back and really see the big structure of your application. And so that's why we provide it. Next, we provide the recommendation. So in this case, it says, please follow these preparation steps in the files identified before using ngUpgrade. It identified ngUpgrade as the best way to migrate your application, but it found a couple AngularJS patterns that needed to be manually fixed before you can migrate. In this case, we actually recommend how you can fix those AngularJS patterns. When you find root scope, you convert them into services. When you find JavaScript, you convert it into Typescript. And when you find controllers, you start using AngularJS components. You can't see here, but in each bracket, usually we provide a link that helps identify where to learn about this. Next, we provide a files to prepare section. This is that list of files that points to the different AngularJS patterns you have. So in this case, it found root scope, JavaScript, and controllers. In the previous section, we identified how you could convert those and where you could go to learn to convert those. And so this provides an easier way of migrating because you know exactly which steps you need to take and in exactly which files you need to start correcting. So if you want to learn more, please visit this link or scan the QR code, and you can see how ngMigration Assistant works. I'll give you just a second to take some pictures if you want. So alongside ngMigration Assistant, we decided to build a new resource as well to kind of go along with this. It really is its sister resource, and it helps answer questions like these. What is ngUpgrade? Where can I learn about migrating? What are Angular elements? And when can I start using Angular? Some of these are cheesy questions. Some of them are very general, that you can always ask more specific questions on this forum. The ngMigration forum is a place where you can ask all of the migration questions you've ever had. It's a place where you can find base information on all the different migration approaches available today. It covers different migration approaches. It goes in depth into each of those migration approaches. It also provides helpful content, awesome tools to help you along the way, and even identifies consultants that can help you with your app. So let's take a look and see what it looks like. So here we are at the home page. And you can see the main content is stored in the wiki. That's where we want all the documentation to be present. This is an open source forum, community-driven, community-run. We want you guys to be able to add all of the relevant information you have and help the community with their migration approaches. Again, we clarify some terminology because when someone looks up an AngularJS problem, they want to get an AngularJS solution, but sometimes they get an Angular solution or vice versa. So we're trying to kind of get ahead of that problem right now. We offer a why upgrade page. Often I hear that developers are eager to use Angular, but they have this massive AngularJS application that they have to migrate, and their company's on AngularJS, and they don't really know how to tell the decision makers that they really, really want to move to Angular. That's what this page is for. This page is to show you why Angular is so awesome. It's to help clarify why we made the transition from AngularJS to Angular. It identifies some key changes, like faster time to market, catching bugs in build time rather than runtime. And then it gives you the benefits of using Angular. Angular is a platform, no longer as a framework, but community supported with a team here at Google as well. Then we also have a migration paths overview page. We have this handy little diagram to show you the various different paths that you can take. So you can cover all the different paths that are available. It'll also identify the difference between incremental migrating and big bang migrating. Big bang migrating, also sometimes known as rewriting from scratch. They're pretty different. And there's an important reason why we so heavily identify the difference here. Incremental migrating covers several different migration paths, and you can click here to find out a more in-depth explanation and knowledge about this migration path specifically. So if we look at ngUpgrade, for example, it tells us how ngUpgrade works in just a short couple paragraphs. It also provides the new version of ngUpgrade, or sister version, called Upgrade for Performance. It then gives you some of the preparation needed in order to start using ngUpgrade. And it identifies certain testing available for ngUpgrade. And the same thing along with all of these other pages is that it explains how it works. It gives you awesome tools to help you with this migration process. And then it gives you example applications that really walk through those steps. So to go along with this page, we provided a helpful contents page. This page is all about providing the most relevant and new articles, talks, and presentations on migrating. We want you to be able to post your awesome new talk from a conference or a meetup to share with the world. This forum is really for sharing new ideas, old ideas, available ideas, any ideas, really. We want one place for everyone to come to and learn about migrating. And it's a great place for up-and-coming ideas to kind of get a little more support from the community. As I mentioned, we also have a consulting page. This is when you want someone to help you along the steps throughout your migration process. Maybe you're a large company and migrating isn't as simple as a 1-2 click. But we have many more consultants available today as well. So let's talk about why we included the Why Upgrade page. Again, lots of developers are ready to start using Angular. But AngularJS still holds a lot of applications out there today. Many of us have to maintain our AngularJS applications, but most of us want to migrate them. We're ready to go to Angular. So we included the Why Upgrade page to really help give a voice and to encourage the developers out there to really speak their minds about why Angular is so awesome, share it to businesses, and share it to the decision makers of their team. Because Angular is the bright new future. And we all want to be there. We all want to take a walk down this beautiful path. But we have to sometimes get our team along on board with us as well. Angular is a fast, simple, and modern way of building your web applications. It is comprised of two major changes. We switched to a component-based architecture, and now we're incorporating Typescript. So component-based architectures help standardize and simplify how we build Angular applications. They follow a rule of one practice where you have one component per file. That ends up creating a large number of small files because it's simpler and easier and neater to organize your file structure that way. It's also much easier to migrate your applications if it's one component per file. And we also introduced component directives, or AngularJS components. They're there to bridge the gap between the AngularJS directive, which are tons of them, and the Angular component. It really is the AngularJS component directive is an addition to a directive. You're adding the component helper and modifying a directive to be more component-like. Likewise, we started using TypeScript to help improve how we build applications. It can be as simple as installing the TypeScript compiler, switching your JS to TS extensions, and adding types to your application. Maybe it's not that fast, but for some applications it definitely is. You can gradually add types to existing functions and variables, and that helps pin down the types for future use. With enhanced error reporting and catching bugs in build time rather than runtime, we've dramatically reduced runtime errors. This also speeds up time to market. So let's look at incremental migrating. Incremental migrating encompasses a lot of different migration approaches. It's a process of taking one part of your AngularJS application and moving it to a new part in Angular. It kind of looks like this. Slowly building a stone rock tower. You take one old feature, you move it to Angular, and you can add a new Angular feature to it at the same time. This process is great for larger applications that can't just drop everything and move to Angular, but need to also start migrating their old AngularJS applications. So when we have an incremental migration, we end up having a hybrid application where you're hosting both an AngularJS app and an Angular app. Again, you're converting some of your AngularJS features to Angular while you're adding new Angular features to your Angular app. Eventually, you've converted all of your AngularJS features, and all you're doing is adding new Angular features, and so you don't have to support your AngularJS application any longer. Again, this approach is great for medium to large applications. So the different incremental migration approaches that we'll talk about today are Angular Elements, ngUpgrade, and hybrid routing. Angular elements are custom HTML elements bundled as an Angular, missing the word, component, sorry, that are automatically bootstrapped into the DOM. When you add them, they're automatically bootstrapped, and when you remove them, they're automatically removed as well. This is a great way for if you want to slowly learn Angular, you don't have a ton of time to start ramping up on learning Angular, and you want to add new Angular features into an AngularJS application. It's called downgrading an Angular component. You build a custom Angular element, and you place it into your AngularJS application. And over time, you've done that so many times that now your AngularJS application is more filled with Angular elements than it actually is of AngularJS elements. Another way that you can incrementally migrate is through ngUpgrade. ngUpgrade creates a hybrid application. You're hosting both AngularJS and Angular at the same time. It uses the ngUpgrade module to help with that. When a component or a service is controlled by AngularJS, it's interoperated seamlessly with components and services that are controlled by Angular. And finally, we have to talk about routing. If you've used a router in your AngularJS application, then eventually you will want to upgrade your router to an Angular router. What this looks like is when you're migrating, you have two routers hosting the Angular router, AngularJS router, and the Angular router. Whether that's the built-in AngularJS router and the built-in Angular router, or the UI AngularJS router and the UI router. You follow the same approach for both. You have to convert all of your components and services first to Angular, and as your very last step, you convert or you upgrade your router to Angular. That way, you no longer have to support AngularJS anymore. So now let's talk about Big Bang migration. Big Bang migration is kind of the opposite of incremental migration. It's a you do it all at once thing. You drop what you're doing and you start something new. Looks a little bit like this. You're taking a leap off of AngularJS and into, we'll say, warm water of Angular. It's a fresh start. You get to use all the new techniques that you've always wanted to. You don't have to refactor your old code because you don't have to use your old code. You get to use brand new code. You get to write it exactly how you always wanted to. All those little things you kept note of as you were writing it, you can finally do that. Now, the Big Bang approach is great for smaller applications. The reason why is because you kind of have to drop everything and start new. You can keep your AngularJS app running, but on the side, you'll be building an Angular app up. This really isn't recommended for large applications, but it is an exceptionally great option for smaller applications. Now let's look at the helpful content section. Again, the helpful content is where people can post new ideas, old ideas, relevant ideas about migrating to Angular. It's an area where up-and-coming startups, up-and-coming consultants can really voice their help and get feedback from the community. Likewise, the consulting section also is where consultants are there to help you. Sometimes your application is just far too big to migrate on your own, and you really do need someone out there to help you. You can take classes, you can follow tutorials, or you can have one-on-one help with each migration step. There's lots of consultants out there today, and we highly recommend that you continue adding to our consultants list, as we clearly can't have all of them already on there. So if you want to learn more about the ngMigration forum, add something that you know about migrating, ask a question, please visit this link and scan the QR code. And let's all get excited about moving to Angular. Thank you.